Okay, we will begin, and thank you for your patience. I hope everyone had a good lunch. Yeah, and to continue this very important hearing that we've been having this morning on DACA perspectives, we are so honored to have Joseph I. Castro to join us this afternoon. Joseph was appointed as the 8th president of California State University, Fresno, in 2013. He is the first Central Valley native to serve in this leadership position. Dr. Castro is also professor of educational leadership at the Kremen School of Education and Human Development. Prior to his appointment at Fresno State, he served as Vice Chancellor, Student Academic Affairs, and Professor of Family and Community Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco from 2006 to 2013. Earlier in his career, he held faculty and/or administrative leadership positions at 4 other University of California campuses. So that just about covers the board here, from Berkeley, Davis, Merced, and Santa Barbara. Dr. Castro is the grandson of farm workers from Mexico. He was born and raised in Hanford, California, and is the first person in his family to graduate from higher education. We are so honored to have you. Welcome, and we'll look forward to your testimony.
How's that? Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today, and thank you for lunch. That was a very nice opportunity to visit with all of you.
Prepared by Josh early this morning.
Great job, Josh. I am very honored today to represent the California State University system and Chancellor White, who would have liked to have been here but was not able. And I'm also representing my campus as well, Fresno State, and I know we have a few Fresno State alumni on this board. The CSU, as you may know, educates the next generation of leaders in agriculture and so many other professions critical to the future success of our state. As someone who grew up in Hanford, just south of Fresno in the Central Valley, and now as president of Fresno State, I know that agriculture is the backbone of California's economy. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, I was testifying to the Master Plan Committee in the legislature, and I mentioned to them that my grandparents immigrated to this country from Mexico, actually from Zamora, Michoacan, just like our friend Javier. Yes. And my great-grandfather came here and helped to build the Santa Fe Railroad. And I mention this because I also know, as all of you do, that immigration has provided a powerful force for success throughout the history of the United States. And that force continues today. The U.S. is the economic powerhouse it is today, and California the largest economy within the United States, because we have built on the entrepreneurial drive and spirit of immigrants from across the world, because their dream has become our reality. And according to a recent report by the Public Policy Institute of California, California has more immigrants than any other state, and half of California's children have at least one immigrant parent. So I have taken to heart the issue of students brought here as children without documentation. I know of many students and university colleagues who are currently protected under DACA. These are men and women who have lived in the United States, as you've heard already today, almost their entire life, who attended elementary and high school here, who have friends and family and connections here, who often know no country but the country that we share. Those covered by DACA have shown that they are willing and ready to contribute, either by pursuing a college degree or serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. They are dedicated to improving the quality of their lives and their families' lives, and they want the best for our country. And many of these hard-working men and women are justifiably apprehensive about what the future holds. They are disheartened, as I am, by the decision to rescind the DACA protections in a matter of months unless our congressional leaders act. Unfortunately, the CSU is not a nation unto itself, though with more than 500,000 students, faculty, and staff, and a further 3.4 million alumni, we almost could be a nation. We are the largest public university system in this country. As a public university system, we operate under and within the laws of California and the United States. So what are the things that we can and must do? I believe there are three things that we as a university can and must provide. One, a quality and affordable education. Two, a source of information. And three, a voice. To start with education, under California law, CSU students who lived in the state and attended California schools as children can continue to attend the university and pay in-state resident tuition, as well as receive state and university financial aid. These protections under state law are entirely separate from their DACA status. And we want our students to continue attending classes, participating in campus activities, join research projects, and seek out new opportunities to learn by doing, and ultimately we want them to graduate. We know that student success requires an environment free of fear and intimidation. While we cannot control the operations of federal immigration enforcement, we can ensure that CSU campus police, to the full extent permitted by law, number one, do not enter into agreements with state or local law enforcement agencies, Homeland Security, or any other federal department for the enforcement of federal immigration law. Two, that they do not honor immigration hold requests. And three, that they do not contact, detain, question, or arrest individuals solely on the basis of being or suspected of being a person that lacks documentation. This is about creating an environment of trust so that all students and employees can turn to our campus police and other campus authorities in their time of need. Second, information. Perhaps the most important thing campus authorities can provide is information about student and employee rights and what steps they need to take to protect themselves. Chancellor White has sent out numerous communications university-wide about DACA, and he has asked me and the other 22 campus presidents to add to these communications. The Chancellor has made a major push to inform our students, employees, families, and friends of the October 5th deadline to renew work permits that expire between September 5th, 2017 and March 5th, 2018. On CalState.edu, which is our website, you can find information on this deadline and numerous other resources for students without documentation, including a directory of nonprofits throughout California that provide legal support services. And at my campus, Fresno State, we have a Dream Outreach and a Dream Success Center. We were one of the universities early on to set those up, and they are dedicated to meeting the unique needs and challenges faced by undocumented students who pursue a college education. We provide guidance to prospective students, and support services for our current students, including referrals for comprehensive legal services. One of our other services that I thought I'd mention today, the Fresno State Student Cupboard, which you might have heard about in terms of the movement for food pantries around the nation, has provided food to students facing food insecurity, including to many undocumented students. We've served 100,000 students already in less than 3 years at Fresno State in our student cupboard, and just this past year alone, 5,000 unduplicated students So it's about a fifth of our student body that has been using that important service. Information and support services are vitally important components of protecting our students during this challenging time. Third is advocacy. We also want to ensure that our lawmakers are well informed and that they understand the sense of urgency to act now, because we don't want to lose a generation of dreamers. As you might imagine, it is risky for those under threat of deportation to speak out. Therefore, I believe we must and will be their voice. We must and will be their advocates. And fortunately, in California, we have bold leadership, and I would include all of you on this particular issue. Yet, I think our work continues at full force on a national level. Chancellor White shared many of the stories and contributions of DACA students, alumni, and employees with members of California's congressional delegation and at the U.S. Department of Education in Washington just last month. And the Chancellor reported that many of the elected leaders with whom he spoke on both sides of the aisle recognize that DACA recipients are valued members of our university, our state, and nation, and that congressional action is needed now. I've had many similar conversations with our federal representatives throughout the Central Valley. I've met with and spoken by phone with all three members of Congress who represent Fresno State's 4-county service area. And I'm also pleased to see bipartisan efforts being demonstrated by some Valley members of our state legislative delegation. In addition, my Office of Governmental Relations has been in frequent contact with the Washington and district staff of our congressional delegation, including the offices of our 2 U.S. senators. In the many interactions with our elected officials, we have expressed strong support for our students and conveyed the need for a legislative remedy to this time-sensitive issue. Last week, Congressman Jim Costa of Fresno, a Fresno State alum, and a strong supporter of agriculture, spoke on the House floor on behalf of all DACA students, and he urged his colleagues to reach a bipartisan solution as soon as possible. Congressman Valadeo has expressed support, and so has Congressman Denham. And so we're happy to see that bipartisan support among some of our members. So with these positive steps the CSU is taking, I believe our voices in support of our DACA students are being heard. But I believe our lawmakers need to hear from each and every one of us. They especially need to hear from you, if they haven't already, because you all represent agriculture and the backbone of this economy. And we need to give backbone to those who must stand up to the political pressures that they might face in Washington and to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, this is an issue that should transcend partisanship. The men and women protected by DACA are our students and colleagues, neighbors, and friends. Our DACA students at Fresno State and throughout the CSU system, and there are over 8,000 throughout the CSU system, they are part of the next generation of leaders who will bring new ideas that strengthen our agricultural sector for decades and decades ahead. So I ask you to let us make sure that they and their dreams flourish here in California and beyond. And I'll end there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very powerful statement. You said that across the CSU system there are 8,000 DACA students.
Roughly, a little bit more, and it could be that there are many more. There are some challenges in terms of specificity, but it's in that ballpark.
And did you comment about how many students are employed by CSU who are DACA? Might be harder to know.
I don't have that number. It would be less, but we do have staff who are DACA, but I don't have a number for you.
Right. And I believe that the UC system has filed suit.
Yes.
Has CSU, are they participating in a similar?
Yes, the University of California filed their own suit. We joined the Attorney General's suit, so we're partnering with Attorney General Becerra.
Excellent. That's a powerful tool, I believe.
Yes.
That will probably take quite some time to unfold, right?
That's right, and he's been a real champion for this area. He was just in Fresno recently, and I spoke with him, and he told me he was going to do everything he can to support this effort.
I know we've asked some of our other speakers if you're optimistic, and it's a tough question because there's so many unknowns. What are you feeling about the future?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I do think we need to strengthen our advocacy, and I do think the time is now. I think this is an opportune time for folks like you and others throughout agriculture who care about this issue to reach out to members who may not have been out publicly in support, and to say to them that we would support you to do this. I think there are some that are frankly on the fence and in our own backyard. So I would just urge that advocacy, which is what we've been doing on our campus for our students and our faculty and our staff, and that would be very helpful right now.
Excellent, excellent. Other questions? We so appreciate you coming. Yes, Martha, and then Mike.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. The question is, you had 8,000 DACA today, but and maybe I lost, graduated in general total DACA. Is that number you gave? Or?
So over 8,000 DACA students throughout the CSU. So at our 23 campuses today. I don't have that number, but it would be many thousands, would be my guess. We graduated just 5,000 total students last year, Fresno State alone, and multiply that times the 20, there would be many DACA students. And I could try to get that number for you if you'd be interested.
Yeah, thank you, because it's
Sure.
good to say these have gone through the system.
Yes, absolutely.
And these are still in the system, but
That's
those have
right.
gone through the system.
And they're out working and
Yeah.
being leaders. Yes.
Thank
you.
Mike?
Dr. Castro, your food covered program, how is that funded? And did you say how many students are using that currently?
Yeah, we opened the student cupboard in November of 14, just before Thanksgiving. So it's going to turn 3 years old in November. We've already exceeded 100,000 visits in less than 3 years. And in this past academic year that ended June 30th, so 16-17, we had 5,000 unduplicated student visits. So that's about a fifth of our student body. Initially, we funded this through a combination of campus funds and private funds. And what has happened, it's been a wonderful story of our alumni and other friends. And I know you've helped us in many ways, Mike, at Fresno State. I want to thank you and Don, others here who've helped us. But the cupboard is now completely funded through private contributions, food contributions that come from our ag leaders who will give us. Joe Del Bosque, for example, just dropped off boxes and boxes of his wonderful cantaloupes. And we get watermelon. We get so many different fruits and vegetables from our friends. And then we also work with organizations like the Community Food Bank of Fresno, Catholic Charities, to get advantages in terms of buying food at lower costs and to share resources. So it's made a huge difference. And when I've looked at this across Fresno State, the users are represented almost exactly according to the population of the campus. So there's not any one group that dominates the use of it, but I do know that many dreamers use it because they tell me that it's essential to their success, because right now, until we get a DREAM Act, they are not eligible for any federal support. And on average, a Fresno State student with need gets a federal grant of at least $3,000 or $4,000. So that's a big gaping hole in their financial aid program, and so we try to help them with private support, but the cupboard helps them with food, and that makes a big difference.
Congratulations on that effort. Very
Thank
important. Other questions that you might have before we bring this to a conclusion? Yes, Helene.
Just a comment. I don't know how many we have, because one of our early concerted efforts was to not have information that could be FOIA'd.
Right.
And so now it makes it harder for us to actually know how many students we have. But we were worried that, the feds could come and just get the records, and then we wouldn't be able to protect the students' privacy.
Right.
So I don't know what protections are in place now for the universities, but that's been a concern that we've had. So they have some records. I think there's only one office that have it, and it might be Campus Council.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And I think there's, in terms of sharing that information, there are laws that protect those students, and we'll make sure that we follow those laws.
I had a question about enrollment.
Yes.
Are you seeing decline, or what's the status trend?
We are blessed with an abundance of students across the CSU system, getting close to 500,000 students now. Every campus except for 2 is operating above its enrollment targets. Fresno State, for 100 years, we didn't have to adjust our admissions policies. We could take anybody who met the general requirements, but in the last few years, the last 3 in particular, we've had to declare what's called impaction in the CSU system, where you change your standards. The UC went through this when I served there in the 90s, and now the CSU is going through it. That's a whole other policy issue that I believe deserves attention. We should be investing more state resources in our higher education system so that we can admit and enroll and graduate students from all different backgrounds who've done everything we've asked them to meet those requirements. But because of limitations in state funding, campuses like Fresno State, we had to deny over 5,000 students this year who met all the normal admissions requirements. That's a very unusual and new thing, and one of the challenges of that occurring is that many of our students in the Valley are place-bound. They can't necessarily go to Los Angeles or the Bay Area, and so then their option is to go to the community college and then try to transfer. And so we're seeing many more transfer students, which is great, but as the number of transfer students increases and the total pie stays the same, we have to take fewer freshmen. So it's squeezing the whole system. And that, along with the lack of a public higher education bond act in over a decade, those are the 2, in my view, biggest challenges from a enrollment and a fiscal situation, because our infrastructure has been deteriorating across the system without having enough state investment in our facilities. Sure.
Dr. Castro, thank you for the encouragement that the congressional delegation hear from us.
Thank you.
I'm encouraged, in the names that have been the congressional delegates or representatives who have spoken in favor of DACA and DREAM Act provisions. But do you know, is there a portion of our California delegation who oppose, and or would you say our congressional delegation is working together, as well as the 3 congressional delegates that are representatives that you My congressional representative is Congressman Amalfa, a Republican from Butte County. And he speaks to immigration, but I think it's an issue that he probably wouldn't, well, maybe speak too much on. Just, and I think often follows the Republican leadership's position. But would you say that there's a Republican group that we need to focus on, or just one-on-one? I should be contacting Congressman Malfa more urgently on this.
Thank you. I think right now I would focus on making sure everybody in the delegation was together and sensed the urgency of the DREAM Act or something similar to that would allow these students to remain, to work, to finish their degrees, and to become leaders. And I wouldn't want to embarrass anybody, but I think there are some members who have been publicly expressing support and some who have not been saying a whole lot. And I think right now it would be so helpful if our delegation was together and working to get this done quickly, like as in this month if possible, because that would definitely allay the concerns that people have, because this is their life. And I think they're very concerned, and justifiably so. So just that sense of urgency, I think if that could be shared with each and every member, I think that might help.
Do you have a template from your perspective, from the university perspective, that might be helpful for us to base our future letters off of?
Yes, we could provide you with information. Sure.
Don and Helene?
No, Dr. Castro, thank you for coming here and enlightening us on the CSU system.
Thank you.
Appreciate your leadership at Fresno State and really your involvement in the community. And I think all of us have know people that are touched by DACA, and it affects our whole community. So, thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Dr. Castro, just
Yes.
curious if you're finding any particular supports that help your students. One of the speakers this morning from Early Mart talked about students are stressed, and we're seeing that with ours as well. And I'm just curious if since you've been in session longer than we have, if there's a few weeks longer, if there's any things that you're seeing are helpful with that stress.
I think it's providing the opportunity for students to share what's on their mind with other students in a safe setting. We know the research shows that our DACA students are experiencing such high levels of stress that many of them might need to go to counseling and just sit with a counselor. But if it's not that, just providing safe spaces for them to share their thoughts. We meet, my administration meets privately with groups of dreamers all the time. But just to show you how sensitive this matter is, we don't have all their names. They give us their first name. It's that sensitive, and I'm their president. So it just shows you, and they're not concerned about me, but they're concerned about your earlier point. Well, what if someone sees a meeting list with me and puts two and two? So as you can imagine, that kind of stress just is so pervasive and concern. So I think just listening to them and giving them a chance to share what's on their mind and to reassure them that we're working on this at your campus and all the other public university campuses. I think that's very important right now, because as much as I speak on this topic, some of my students have come up to me and asked, well, what's your view of this? So they don't always hear it through the different channels. And I think Martha's point earlier about multimedia is really important here.
Can you remind us once again, what is the age range of a DACA person? What would be the youngest and the oldest?
I don't have that offhand.
The
Larry,
program
do you
started
know?
in 2012.
Maybe one of you have the age range?
So help me out here on the math. What would be the age range? Okay, so roughly 30% between 25 and 35, and then, and that was the balance? No, 30. Okay, great, thank you. Other questions? Nancy?
Well, that raises a question.
Sure.
Does that mean if someone came in 4 years ago as a 4-year-old, they're not DACA? Did you have to be here by a certain date? 2012? Okay, thank you.
And then,
Well,
of
thank
course,
you
we
so
have
much.
students who didn't apply for DACA for some of the reasons
Right, that we've
expressed
heard.
earlier, so they're not DACA, but they are at our university campuses, and they're treated as in-state residents if they qualified under state law.
Well, thank you for staying the course, working with us, and we will definitely look forward to our continued collaboration and your leadership on this issue and so many others.
Thank you. Thank you for dedicating the day to this important topic, and I'll help in any way I can.
Great.
Thank you.
We will count on you. We will call on you. Okay. Josh, are we prepared to go to Maria Chaviste at this time, or should we could do that? We could also take this moment, if it were appropriate, to consider what action the board wants to take.
I think it would be good to.
You want to speak in here?
I think it would be good to connect with our next speaker if we
Yes.
could, because that will wrap up our kind of DACA
Perfect.
discussion for the day, and then after that we can consider board action and the draft letter that we currently have
Excellent.
addressing DACA.
So our technical staff will get us going on Skype. And while we're doing this, how about if I introduce Maria?
That'd be great.
Okay. Maria Chaviste is the Policy and Program Development Director at the Chief Justice Earl Warren Institute on Law and Social Policy. Maria joined University of California's Berkeley School of Law as a lecturer after co-founding a strategic and policy consulting group, serving as a senior White House and U.S. Department of Labor official. From 1998 to 2001, she served as assistant to the President and Deputy Chief of Staff to President Bill Clinton. Among her responsibilities in this role was overseeing issues relating to Mexico and Latin America. She has worked as a community leader and corporate attorney. She is also a senior fellow with the law school's Chief Justice Earl Warren Institute on Race, Ethnicity, and Diversity. Maria is on the Advisory Council of Farm Worker Justice, a nonprofit organization that seeks to empower migrant and seasonal farm workers in improving living and working conditions, as well as immigration status and other issues. I've had the great pleasure of working with Maria on many issues, and I'm so pleased that she can join us today via Skype, and I believe she's in the East Bay today. Join us from there.
Hello.
Well, good afternoon, Maria. This is Craig McNamara on the State Board of Food and Agriculture. It's so nice to have you with us. I just shared with the board a bit of your background, and we've had quite an amazing morning this morning, Maria, talking about DACA. We've had most recently our president from CSU Fresno address the board and did an excellent job. We've also had representation from organic grower in the Salinas area, Javier Zamora. We've heard from a school board leader and principal in the Early Mart School District down by Bakersfield. We've had representation from UFW Foundation and others. So we're really looking forward to your thoughts, and we are all ears.
Well, with that kind of an introduction, I hope you can hear me all right.
We can hear you perfectly.
Great. Let me start by suggesting that anyone who tells you X is going to happen within the next 6 months or a year, you really can't count on that. I think the best way to think of these issues in terms of immigration, DACA specifically, let me just lower a little bit. I'm hearing an echo. We have to think of scenarios. So let me start with DACA. I happen to have spoken with a woman named Tyler Moran, who is managing essentially a war room in Washington, D.C., trying to coordinate the various actors, both the grassroots as well as the legislative table. And she informs me is that the House, I hope you're all aware of the discharge petition that is pending, which is essentially it needs 218 sponsors, signatures to force a vote on the DREAM Act. And that is a high number to get, but it is possible. So there is a very concerted effort to target members of Congress, have them be visited by the constituents. And by the way, not just Hispanics, not just immigrants, but those in the community. As you mentioned, Craig, there are allies, if you will, I'm going to use that word, allies, who may not be immigrants themselves, may have concerns about other aspects of immigration, but feel that the Dreamers, the DACA students, are really the majority of America. All the public polls show are in favor of some relief for these individuals. So it's a question of taking the opportunity presented on the legislative calendar over the next 3 months, and failing that over the next 3 months till March. And it requires a level of coordination between grassroots, constituency voices, and pressure through media and other sources to see if, in fact, we can get a vote. Now, I will tell you, as someone who has been working on immigration issues since 2001 and before that, that I would have thought that the Dreamers was the low-hanging fruit, was the easiest group of people. And the fact that it is now 17 years later is very much a shocking, maybe too strong a word, but it's a disappointment that it is so difficult, which is why I started my comments with the beginning of this admonition. Who knows how we're going to get things done? But what is also clear is that a tremendous amount of energy and commitment and real champions, both in Washington, D.C. and outside of Washington. So I think that you need to put DACA there and then consider, especially since this is a wonderful council, you're bringing focus on agriculture, which is a very important industry, and which is vital, not obviously to California, but to the country as well, and wonder what else may impact, what else may be sought by other forces as this immigration debate continues. And to that, the fact that Congressman Goodlatte, Virginia, introduced his ag worker bill yesterday, which is a greatly expanded guest worker program with a cap at 500,000 that I was reading the bill last night, that does away with certain protections, housing and transportation. We're going to have a whole discussion about that bill, but it's also important to recognize that earlier this year, Congressman Goodlatte also introduced essentially an employer verification bill. And I think that we have to keep an eye on those two bills because, as you well know, at least 50% or more of the ag workforce is undocumented. And so that pressure and what happens vis-a-vis the Dreamers, DACA, the wall, and ag makes for a very difficult scenario or situation to predict. So I know that many of you, I imagine, have been involved in conversations with others who are paying attention to the various ag bills in Congress. There was also, by the way, a bill introduced by Congressman Gutierrez and Labrador, a bipartisan bill, to permit authorized states to implement or legislate their own guest worker program. That hasn't gotten a lot of attention. So, at the risk of sounding completely confident, I can't really tell you what's going to happen. But there is no question that this issue of immigration and how we adjust our system to both provide the workforce that we need under conditions that we can agree upon, it is not going away. And what I would really love to do is take this moment and really open it up for questions, because there's so much. I don't just want to talk at you because there's so many things to consider. It'd be helpful to know, what are you interested in? What are you hearing from your regions, for parts of the state of California? And maybe I can help with whatever intelligence or information I may have.
I think that's a great idea. And can you hear us well?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Let me just pause by saying that this is an action-oriented board, and you know that we're appointed by the governor to advise the governor and our Secretary of Agriculture on all issues that face this industry. So this is a very important one, and we will take action on it. One quick question is, has this whole DACA situation right now, as we see it, distracted us from the real focus? I mean, it is real. It's so important. But has it distracted us from the larger broken immigration system that H-2A is just a Band-Aid for, and we're not really engaging in a permanent and long-lasting fix to such an important part of our nation's workforce?
I couldn't agree with you more. And it has been one of the strategic questions that has been asked periodically in the immigration debate. And I could go on at length about 2009 and 2010, but I won't. I would say there's two ways to think of it. It is possible that the media's attention on DACA and the Dreamers, because of the heartstrings and the lives and the stories, may be of more interest to the public. It is possible that it's an opening to do something like less attention on the Good Lat bill or the E-Verify, it can serve as a positive distraction if there can be some consensus among various players to actually try to get something done. Now, I will tell you that the Farm Worker Justice Fund immediately came out against Good Lat bill. And while I may share some of the concerns, there is a school of thought on the left that will say no to guest worker over and over and over again. And I think, Craig, you've heard me say, I used to be one of those people until I realized that we already have a guest worker program. It's the undocumented. And so I think that rational, thoughtful people seeking a solution should try to take that as the reality it is and figure out, how do we do this in a lawful way with minimal exploitation, but also satisfy our workforce needs? So I guess what I'm suggesting is, if there were an opportunity to really engage with some of the advocates, not the knee-jerk, no, but some folks who understand that we really, if you'll remember, in 2000, in the lame duck, we actually had a bill that had been worked with Howard Berman, I was in the White House at the time, that would have expanded and legalized guest workers, and it was agreed upon with the UFW, and then Senator Bill Graham from Texas stopped it. So I think there are opportunities there, but you have to be engaged in the conversation.
Let me introduce some of our board members that have questions for you, Maria. Ben Drake is a member of our board from the San Diego area, a wine grape grower, avocado grower, passion fruit, and others. Ben?
So I'm in agreement with you that I think a comprehensive solution needs to occur, whether it has E-Verify with it. I went through the old SAWS program, and what I experienced was, as soon as my employees got legalized, they left. So I had no one there. So I don't agree with coming up with an arbitrary number, and I guess the number that was thrown around was 500,000 or 500,000 people. I'm looking at the approach that Feinstein came up with was, let's take the people that are here, let's get those people documented, and then we'll figure out how we're going to keep them in certain industries for a period of time and gradually bring them into the FO if they want to be naturalized or not.
Absolutely. In fact, that was the core of ag jobs, both in 2000 and then its subsequent iteration, was recognizing that the SAWS program, and this is what I say to many who say, if you deported all the farm workers, Americans would take those jobs. The answer is no. If you have a choice between working at McDonald's and working out in the fields, you're going to work at McDonald's, period. Even if you could make more money out in the fields. It's just a reality. So we need to recognize that, and finding ways to have people stay in agriculture for a period of time. And by the way, I also want to point out that there has to be some opportunity for what is known as circularity. There are a good number of people in other countries who really don't want to live here forever, but they want it to be their choice, and not such a blanket. You're only here, basically treating you as if you're only a pair of pants and nothing else, right? And the other thing we need to remember is that life happens. And maybe someone really only intends to work here for 4, 5, 6 years, but they meet someone. They fall in love. So unless you create pathways for adjustment of status, you're creating a problem for 30 years from now. And so I think there are opportunities. We've discussed some of these issues. I really think if there was a willingness to hear each other out and not be just one way or another, but maybe I'm just optimistic.
Thank you for that word circularity. I'd never thought of it. I've thought of it. I'd never heard of it described as such. It is poignant and it's accurate. I'd like to introduce Nancy Cassidy. Nancy is also from the San Diego area, and she is general manager of a very successful food store in that area.
Thank you for being with us today. I'm wondering, are there other examples anywhere in the world where we have successfully modeled this problem?
Well, I think people often look at the Canadian guest worker program in ag as one that is both legal and people do return home and it seems to work. And the reason I would submit it's been more successful is that the growing season is a defined period of time. And so it can really be seasonal, right? It can really be probably no more than 6 months. And so that facilitates it actually being a true temporary worker program. As you well know, in places like California, there's seasonal work, right? Or Washington. I always remember hearing from growers in Washington State of needing tens of thousands of workers for the cherries, but really only, 6 weeks. So I think we have certain crops, certain products that are seasonal, but in a place like California, you can have winter and summer. So that becomes a problem. And I do think, let me just say this. I know we're talking about ag, but I won't tell you the long story of why I happened to be in Qatar on election night in November 2016. Be that as it may, I was doing election commentary. Something like 80% of the people in Qatar are foreign workers. And what struck me, they were mostly from Bangladesh, the Philippines, Malaysia. What struck me was that here was a country which was very rich in oil, was really creating jobs and providing opportunity for people whose home countries did not provide that opportunity. And it really made me think, if we know human beings will in fact go someplace else to try for opportunity, why can't the civilized community manage to design a program that respects the humanity of these workers while also satisfying the labor needs? I'm not going to go to the Qatar for the World Cup because of all the abuses that took place in building the stadiums. I'm sure you heard about that. But it didn't have to be that way. So I just give you that macro view that there's ought to be a way to satisfy both of those needs.
I'd next like to introduce Joy Sterling. Joy and her family have been in the grape growing and winemaking business for many decades, and actually has supplied wine, I believe, for the White House.
Thank you very much for answering our questions. You mentioned the need to find ways to keep people in agriculture. What ways do you recommend?
Well, I think at one extreme, you would essentially have people locked in for extraordinary lengths of time. And I think that I would hope all of us would agree that you know, some time would be excessive, but what that time is, we could discuss. On the other hand, that based on the experience from '86, it's clear that we need some sort of limitations. I think what was come up in mutually agreed upon discussions in the past of some sort of 3 to 5 year is probably something that is workable. Excuse me, I got something. So that's probably something that's workable. But also, if as we know, there are jobs and there are jobs, and so if the industry can create opportunities for advancement, right, for more skilled machinery, etc., that'll keep people in agriculture as well. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you, it did. Our next question comes from Don Cameron, and Don is a very accelerated grower in the Fresno area. His company is Terra Nova, and they farm 7,500 acres of very mixed vegetables and crops. Don?
Thank you. My question centers around, you know, as our labor pool continues to get smaller, you know, we're looking at at mechanization, robotics, artificial intelligence. I mean, at some point, if we don't have the labor available, and like I say, we're transitioning that way now, although the technology really isn't there yet. But at some point, I think we may see more of that, and it may mean that you don't have the same quality product being produced, but it's going to be the most economical way to go. And I mean, do you see that coming into the picture as we progress with higher technology in the field?
Absolutely. I think just two quick examples. The H2A program really grew in Florida for sugarcane in the 60s, 70s, 80s with Jamaican workers. And it was a calculation for the sugarcane growers in Florida that bringing in the workers from Jamaica was cost effective. Eventually, because of certain abuses, exploitations, lawsuits, things tightened in sugarcane, and the mechanization took off because it became more cost effective to invest in technology and machines than getting the cheaper labor. And that's just a reality. And you make the point about about products not being perhaps what consumers will remember or want, and we all know the stories about the development of tomatoes that are easy to be picked by machines, right? So I think this question of mechanization and technology is one that is not limited to agriculture. Indeed, there are a number of people interested in the economy globally who are grappling with this question, the future of work, right? I mean, I always ask, who decided we needed driverless cars? But someone did, and there's a lot of investment. And trust me, once that really becomes a reality, there will be a lot of people without work. So not to make this too apocalyptic, but we need to think about what happens. Yes, you have a farm to run, a business to run, and yes, mechanization may make it more feasible. At some point, your community or our state or our country is going to have to deal with millions of people not having gainful employment, right? So I know that's not what you're focused on, but thank goodness there are other people who are thinking about this. Not that they have any answers, but yeah, technology, as even now, manufacturing, all the people who are complaining about the auto plants and the jobs that have gone, there are jobs right now. The lack of training in terms of our workforce for doing these technologically more challenging work is also, I think, an indictment of our not thinking about what our future workforce needs are.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Bryce, do you have any? Martha, other questions that we might have at this point? You know, what you were just saying about the driverless car and the displacement of workers does make me think, as a farmer, makes me remember the 1960s with the advent of technology. The most obvious one was in processing tomatoes. And I think that the technology was appropriate and excellent. Where we really missed was not being proactive in retraining of the men and women who were out in the fields doing that back-breaking work that was very unhealthy, I think, health-wise. And it would have been rather simple and incumbent upon us to retrain prior to the advancement of technology. Maybe we should think about that as we move forward. And on that note, I want to introduce Martha Montoya. Martha is a board member from Southern California and has been a leader in the National Association of Hispanic Publications and also in corporate responsibility, and is also a grower shipper originally from Colombia.
And hello, Maria, and I've met you several times. But I think that the bigger question for you and for all of us is, when I travel South America, Mexico down, I see more youth in the farming area than I see in the United States that have gone to schools and come back to the farms. We think only of labor, but these kids are somewhere between 25 and 30 max. They have gone to school and they are now working with the technology and the platforms and the workers and the farmers and they themselves being labor, but with technology involved. So somewhere there, these DACA kids, we're missing them to be enticed to come back to the farming area. And I say that because last week I was at the Latinas for Technology, or Latinas in Tech, and I found 4 DACA girls, Google, Cisco, IBM, Microsoft, lost in that world, but they're from farm workers' parents. And when I explained to them farming, their lights just went up beautifully. They love the industry. They love where they come from. They understand what it is, but they were told that they had to move on and go away from farming. And when I told them, well, go back to Cisco and Microsoft and IBM and all, there's a whole farming ag industry within the industry. Hopefully they are, and they're all excited about them. I'm mentoring them right now. But somehow we have left the dialogue of enticement of these DACA kids to come back to where they started with. And if we can entice that, that's the vacuum that we're missing on the aging of our farm workers and farming industry in general. So somewhere there, we as a body, and Maria, you know better, you come from that world and you came and educated yourself and now you're advocating for us. Those are the kids that we need back into our farming area. Somehow we're missing that.
Martha, I don't disagree with you at all that there's been a message of don't go back to agriculture. But I think there's also something deeper and perhaps I'm not sure if this is a place to discuss it, but there is also the reality of a changing agricultural landscape that has to do with corporate consolidation. And for many people, that dream of owning a farm and being your own person and producing something may also be difficult to attain when prices are being dictated by wholesalers and retail. And that is something, you know, if you're in poultry, you probably know those stories as well, or pork. But I think it's kind of hard to attract people to go back to a certain, what their vision of farming is. And by the way, that's what my father did when he went back to Mexico. And right now, my nephew, age 18, is learning the business, and he's probably going to do it in Mexico because that's the only place he can afford to buy the land. But if I were 30 years younger, I'd be buying my own 20 acres. So not all of us have forgotten the land.
Maria, you would have really enjoyed and appreciated the story that Javier Zamora shared with us this morning, a man from Zamora, Michoacan, who came to the Watsonville area in the 1980s, attended some college when he was 40 years old, and now has a 100-acre farm employing 30 people, and incredibly positive about our future. So that was great.
Great.
Bryce, do you have a final question? And I'd like to introduce a good friend of this board, Bryce Lundberg. Bryce's family has been supplying not only your rice cakes for the last 50 years, but a variety of other wonderful organic products.
Well, Maria, thank you for your advocacy, for your eloquent presentation, and you represent this issue so very well. Our farm is so fortunate to have men and women from many countries, and without them, our family would not be able to produce rice and rice cakes and the many things that we're fortunate to make. I am always just amazed we can't develop a solution in this country. I sometimes just wonder where the fundamental resistance comes from. Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it distrust? It doesn't come from a good place. It's got to come from a place that we don't call American. And I just really struggle with that. I was wondering who are the leaders who are going to get this done for us and be able to break through? Do you see a group that'll work together, that are trusted on both sides of the aisle enough to get this done? My congressional representative, I've talked to him about it, and he has a position. It's a very simple position, and I don't know if you think it's good or not, but it's we need a big wide door. This is what he'll talk about, with well-oiled hinges. And he says it's not a small door. It's not a difficult door to open. It's one that works. And I think, well, he's a Republican, and he said, well, that's a pretty open type of idea, that we need a big wide door and it needs to work. And what's not to like about that? But then I think he gets out there in Washington, D.C., and it all breaks down. I think you started off with the idea that predictions are hard, and maybe you won't make a prediction. But do we have a group in Washington, D.C. that can get this done, or is this just a group that's, yeah?
I think we don't yet know who the champions will be. I think that things are so toxic in Washington right now. So the posturing is such that it's hard for people to really come together. And the problem has been analyzed. I mean, part of it is the fact that these members of Congress fly home every week, which is good for the district, but it means they don't know each other. They truly don't know each other. They don't know their families, and they don't see each other as real friends and colleagues, that I can look at my Republican friends and say, I may disagree with you ideologically about this, but I know you care about the country as much as I care about it. Let's find a solution. So that's problem number one. So I don't know who the champions are yet, but I trust, because I'm an optimist, that with pressure from the outside, with industry saying we've got to find a solution, that there will be individuals that will emerge. I will say, to your earlier comment about what is really driving this inability to get solutions, you put your finger on it. And that is, you can't look at immigration without understanding the historical nature of how we were founded. And what I like to say in my immigration law classes is, like, we talk about, oh, we're a nation of immigrants. And I have to remind people that not a single group was welcomed with open arms. There was hostility to Irish, to Italians, to Southern Eastern. And so we have been in this process of defining who is an American. And I would also say that apart from the Native Americans, since everybody came from somewhere else, other than Australia, truly, if you look at the nations of the world, there was actually a people there, and then they formed a nation. You know, you had the city-states in Italy, and then you formed Italy. And look what's happening in Spain with the Catalans wanting to, right? But this country was actually formed on an idea. And oh, by the way, I always say, and then I'll shut up and lead you to your meeting, is John Jay wrote in the Second Federalist paper, thank God, thank Providence has given us this beautiful land with all these resources to a people with one language, one religion, same values. When he wrote it, it was not true. There were different religions. There were people arguing about the nature of America. So this has been an experiment, which makes me optimistic because we have progressed so much. But this immigration debate is grounded in this, who gets to be American? And we have economic needs. And those are the ones that are always fighting. And so I just hope that you will continue to look at these issues and figure out a way to add your voice to helping the country find a solution. Agriculture in the future, part of why I'm involved with the Berkeley Food Institute, is a nation needs to be able to feed itself. With climate change, with the future. So we need ag to be viable, strong, and advancing for the decades to come. Not just because to feed our own citizens, but because there are going to be 9 billion people on the planet by 2050. Right. So we have a challenge. On that cheery note.
Well, on that cheery note, I think it is a fundamental and foundational note that a nation needs to feed itself. And if you look around the globe, we are greatly challenged. We do produce enough food, but as we all know, there are so many global conflicts and polarizations that prevent that from happening. While you were speaking about the history of our nation and the history of agriculture, I did think about the book that Carrie McWilliams wrote in the 1934, Factories in the Fields, that talked about all of the minority and ethnic groups that came to this country to assist us in growing and harvesting our crops and the problems they faced. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We look forward to follow-up conversations, and we look forward to action. And we will take it, and we look forward to your action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Have a good meeting.
Okay, goodbye.
Craig, and there's a data that I found this week. We export 6 billion on fruits and vegetables, but we import 17 or something like that. So we have a deficit, larger deficit. It was written by somebody in Washington D.C. legislator.
Yeah, that's an important.
So we're not able to feed ourselves. The whole country, USA country.
Well, thank you all for contributing to this lengthy and important discussion on DACA. I think we've heard its fullest, and I think it really needs our attention. I know this board will give it just that. We can talk at the conclusion of our meeting what actions we want to take. And I want to shift to another very important part of California agriculture and our agenda, and that's safe drinking water, something that this board, as environmentalists, as public consumers, as farmers, as leaders of the state, believes tremendously in. And we're so honored to have you here today, Senator. Thank you for taking your valuable time, and thank you for taking all that you did to put into the legislation SB 623. But let me officially introduce Senator William W. Monning, who was first elected in November of 2012 and then luckily re-elected in 2016, not luckily, well deserved, to represent the 17th Senate District, which includes all of San Luis Obispo and Santa Cruz counties and portions of Monterey and Santa Clara counties. And prior to that, you represented the 27th Assembly District from 2008 to 2012, which included portions of Monterey, Santa Cruz, and Santa Clara counties. And currently, Senator Monning is the Senate Majority Leader. He also serves as a member of the Senate Committee on Budget, Health, Judiciary, Legislative Ethics, Natural Resources, and Water, and the Budget Subcommittee number 3 on Health and Human Services. Senator Monning was the key author of Senate Bill 623, which would have established the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund to provide short and long-term drinking water solutions to Californians who lack access to safe and affordable drinking water. And let me just say, Senator, that as a state board, we have focused on the issue of water significantly. I've been president of this board for 7 years and on the board for 17, and water has been our focus. We recognize that over 1 million Californians do not have access to safe drinking water. We also realize that our industry, not because we wanted to, but we've contributed significantly to the significant problem that we've had with clean and clear water. So welcome here, and we look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I appreciate the opportunity. I also want to thank Secretary Ross for also extending and supporting the invitation, and she was very gracious in leaving me a voicemail last week saying she wouldn't be in town today, but is looking forward to our continued collaboration on this issue. My assistant, Kathy Smith, who's been our ledge point person on this bill, is going to hand out just a couple of handouts. We may not have enough for each member, so we may have to ask some of you to share. And I won't be referring to them extensively, but one is an information sheet that includes supporters and opponents at this point in a map. But I do want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for your service and all the members for your service. You outlined my district, the 17th Senate District. The #1 employer is agriculture. #2 is hospitality tourism. #3 is higher education. The first 2 largest employers both rely heavily on immigrant workforce. So I was interested in your prior conversation and proud that we as a legislature this year allocated from our general fund budget support for DACA students to be able to protect their status and their continued professional and educational pursuits in California. We've also taken other positions on immigration, but I will leave those discussions for another time because I am here to talk about water. And as you outlined, Mr. Chair, my Senate Bill 623 represents, in my view, even though we haven't secured the votes yet, it represents a very historic achievement in terms of the negotiated agreement that's involved over 70 stakeholders. Agriculture has been a principal co-architect of the current legislation, along with stakeholders from environmental justice communities, cities, counties, environmental organizations, water districts, and you'll see on the information sheet a list of some of those supporters of the legislation. The legislation has gone through multiple amendments, and just to kind of start at the back end procedurally, we did not put it up for a vote in the Assembly at the end of this year's session. It is a 2/3 vote, and I'll walk you through the architecture of the bill. We fully intend to come back full steam in January. It's now what's called a 2-year bill. So I'm going to walk you through briefly the elements and the architecture of the legislation, a little bit on the politics, and then open to your questions and comments as well. As the chair mentioned, this has been a challenge facing the state probably for well over 20 years. And the participation of ag has been rightfully so to look at what is the contribution of ag where there is contaminated water, but also in understanding that we have contaminants statewide that aren't necessarily generated by agriculture. And so one of the, I think, principles of how we've presented this legislation is to look at the broad range of contaminants affecting over 300 communities. The red dots on this map represent communities really from the Oregon border down to San Diego County. Some people think, well, it's just a Central Valley problem, or it's just a Salinas Valley, or it's just an ag problem. And what we've learned, the ag piece is primarily fertilizers and nitrates, but statewide, we have naturally occurring arsenic, chromium-6, lead, other contaminants that are naturally occurring. There's no polluter who can be pointed to or we can go to and seek some form of contribution or compensation. So one of our important stakeholders has been the California Water Foundation, nonprofit, nonpartisan, who have used a lot of their resources to study both the scope of the problem and to look and work with us towards solutions. So the scope of the problem is looking primarily at small, rural, primarily disadvantaged communities who don't have the resources in a small water district to pay for remediation or a connection to a clean water supply. They may be eligible for bond money that could provide a treatment facility, but they can't sustain the operations and maintenance costs. So it boils down to economically disadvantaged communities being most at risk and the least able to address the problem. Working with agriculture, and I want to give credit to all the stakeholders, but the Western Growers Association has really been a leader in building the ag participation in this, along with Rice Commission, dairy, citrus, walnuts, wine grape growers. The list continues to grow. So the interest for ag is to say we have these regional water districts and growers face different enforcement actions, sometimes penalties, kind of a patchwork of enforcement, adjudication, and paying for discovered, determined nitrate contamination or excessive use. Industry-wide, we know that ag seeks to reduce its reliance. I know in the Salinas Valley, which I represent, part of the Salinas Valley, there's enough nitrate in some of the groundwater that they can just use it as irrigation water and get the benefit of the nitrate that's already in the groundwater. For some of the smaller communities, though, the nitrate contamination represents a percentage, a significant percentage, but statewide only about 30%. And so our approach to solution now is to say, okay, we can trace certain ag products, again, primarily fertilizers, causing about 30% of the problem. So that means the majority, 70%, is from these naturally occurring. Watsonville, which I represent, hexachloroform, chrome-6, they need a $25 million treatment facility to provide clean, safe drinking water to a community of about 50,000, many of those farm workers, median income $18,000 per family. They don't have the resources to pay for that treatment facility. Chrome 6, not caused by agriculture, but an agricultural community. So the Water Foundation, through its research and studies, was able to break down that basic proportional accountability. And so our approach then to a solution, let's raise the funding that can provide a dedicated resource, can't be invaded by the legislature, can't be shifted to the general fund, a dedicated resource under the State Water Board, managed by the State Treasurer, 95% of which goes to addressing bringing safe, clean drinking water solutions. Those are described broadly. It could be a treatment facility. It could be operations and maintenance for an existing treatment facility. It could be patching to a clean, safe drinking water in a neighboring water district. We're broad in allowing a board that will represent different stakeholders in determining which solutions are appropriate for funding from this fund. The fund is designed to raise about $130 million a year for 15 years, a grand total of about $2 billion. Agriculture, again, proportionally, would raise about $30 million a year of the total amount, and do it primarily through a mill tax adjustment on fertilizer use. So those that are using the most fertilizer, using the most nitrates, would see it from the manufacturer in the raised mill tax. Dairy, we allow, they are part of the solution, but dairy is afforded, I think, a 2-year window to finalize its funding mechanism, although the California Dairy Association is supportive of SB 623. They're also part of the, broadly speaking, ag solution. When we shift to the non-ag contaminants, 70%, we look to water ratepayers to pay what we call a de minimis fee or assessment. Of course, our opponents call it a tax, and in this state that is a 4-letter word, and it requires a 2/3 vote in both houses, and that gets us into our political challenge. The way we've structured it is saying it's a statewide problem. The state, I think it was 2006, is the first of all 50 states to identify safe, clean drinking water as a human right. So statutorily, we already as a state say your access to clean, safe drinking water is a human right. We haven't figured out how to make good on that promise. Our philosophy of going to ratepayers is to say it's a statewide problem. Let's all hold hands, and if we spread the cost of it among the many, we have in the bill currently a rate increase to ratepayers not to exceed 95 cents per month, with an exemption for people living at 200% of the federal poverty line or below. So they'd be exempt, just like you have power companies now that provide tiered rates or exemptions for people living at the federal poverty line. Be 95 cents for residential ratepayers, mid-sized commercial $5 a month, larger commercial $20, up to $20 a month. And that's based on the size of the water connection. The resistance we're receiving is from some of the larger water districts, urban metropolitan water districts, Aqua, a statewide water association. We've reached out and engaged all of those water districts, LA, East Bay, MUD, Aqua. We've affirmatively sought those meetings, tried to get their input, figure out is there a tweak that would help you, but we're not willing to abandon this fundamental approach to shared burden, shared contribution of all Californians, with the exceptions and exemptions as I mentioned. So with that formula, we achieve over the next 15 years about $2 billion that the California Water Foundation says would be sufficient to address these 300 communities and achieve safe, clean drinking water. Of the remedies I mentioned, I failed to mention bottled water, that the fund could also be used for that. But that's not our long-term objective. There's been some regional water districts that have proposed solutions that would only get us as far as buying bottled water for affected constituents. We don't think that's a good long-term solution. We recognize it may be an emergency, important solution to get safe, clean drinking water. Many communities now, we heard from witnesses in the hearings, they're paying a monthly water bill. They can't drink the water. They can't use it for bathing. They can't cook with it. And they're spending $40, $50 a week buying bottled water, plus paying a water bill that they can use really only to maybe water their lawn or irrigate crops in their backyard. This is unsustainable, and it, of course, falls on the shoulders of those least able to afford paying for that bottled water. So now let me just conclude on kind of the political front, and then glad to answer any of your questions. So because our solution includes the fee, the assessment, the tax, we say de minimis, meaning small, but nonetheless an increase on ratepayers who may argue, I'm not the direct beneficiary of this, why should I pay? I argue why we think it should be a statewide solution. Let's all hold hands. So as we move through the legislative process, we need a 2/3 vote. We moved it through the Senate with bipartisan support. I want to acknowledge one of our principal co-authors, Senator Vidak, who represents Central Valley communities, Republican and a co-author with me. We moved it through the Senate, but without the funding mechanism. When we got to the Assembly, we took amendments to include the funding mechanism that I've described to you. That went to appropriations. Appropriations moved it to the Rules Committee in the Assembly, and it stayed there at the end of session. My commitment to the leadership was I would not put it on the floor if we didn't have the votes. There was a very strong lobbying effort, bipartisan, agriculture, environmental justice, everything in between. A lot of members who would be beneficiaries in their districts, Democrats and Republicans. But the 2/3 vote is where you run into resistance of people who fear their political future could be jeopardized if they go up on a vote for a tax. We had several other critical votes on affordable housing, on a park bond, on an affordable housing bond. Those all required 2/3 votes, and leadership felt at the end of the day there's just fatigue. We don't want to put this up now and lose. There's been too much positive momentum. Again, I said the achievement of this agreement is really unprecedented. In the spirit of full disclosure, in my earlier career as a lawyer, I worked with the United Farm Workers Union in the early 70s, mid-70s, and engaged in many of those battles around the state of California. It's rare to see legislation supported by both the Western Growers Association and the United Farm Workers Union. But that's what this bill represents, because everyone benefits. And I'll just close the benefit again to agriculture. It provides predictability, it provides a mechanism, and it provides recognition by the state of California that the solution, agriculture's responsibility, should be proportional to what's attributable to agricultural contaminants. And by the same token, to provide predictability with regional boards in terms of enforcement actions, that if ag partners are playing by the rules set forth in SB 623, they won't be further penalized, targeted, et cetera. They will have an ongoing obligation, as they do under current law, for best practices to try to minimize use of contaminants, but they will have safe harbor from direct prosecution and a patchwork of prosecutions. So we're very proud of what we've achieved, and the real accolades go to the stakeholders who have spent literally hundreds of hours hammering out many fine details. When we come back in January, our goal is to come out strong. We will take some further amendments in January that were not included at the end of session. So we see it as an open process, continued dialogue, but we're going to need the help of everybody who stands to benefit to help us persuade all Californians to take advantage of this opportunity to bring safe, clean drinking water to all Californians. So I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, and would welcome any questions or comments.
Well, thank you for your thoughtful and optimistic leadership. It is a problem that, as you said, it's a 70-30 or 30-70. In ag, we have contributed to it, and yet we, as a state, have all benefited and enjoyed the bounty that's been produced. And we all need to pay in how we're going to go forward. And I think this board would like to know, what we can best do. I'll let people ask questions before I embrace that. But I know we've talked about this quite a bit over the past. So any questions for the Senator? Don Cameron.
Senator, thank you very much. Really, I appreciate the work you've done on this. After the 15-year period, the funding would continue as a meal tax for agriculture, and would the de minimis for the water users also continue, so the money would continue to come in?
It's a fair question. My understanding, Kathy will correct me if I'm wrong, the user fee for ratepayers would expire at the end of the 15 years. Ag would be adjusted potentially to be commensurate with any ongoing traceable pollution from nitrates, but it's not locked in beyond the 15 years. My understanding, it would be subject to a reevaluation and possible continuation.
We have Ashley, Bryce, and Ben.
So I stand corrected by an expert, not really corrected, but modified. That ratepayer amount is subject to review within those 15 years, after the first 2 years, to see if what's being raised is being distributed, and if we're accumulating too much, that could be adjusted. The legislation would not allow it to exceed what's stated in there, but it could be adjusted downward.
That's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I understand that a lot of these facilities that have been put in throughout the state, especially in the DACs, they get the funding, they get the grant funding to put them in, but then they don't have the ongoing money to keep them functioning correctly, and they sit idle, and the people end up with poor water quality with a facility that's idled and falling apart.
We've used bond money to establish the facility. I think there's one in the Central Valley and Senator Vidak's district, Lanier, for arsenic treatment primarily. It's sitting there idle. This bill would allow to support it to operate as it was intended.
So I also want to thank you for taking on this issue. It's been a difficult one that's needed action for a while, so thank you for doing it. And I've also been really impressed with the collaboration between the agricultural community and the environmental justice community. It's been really good to see. I guess my question goes to kind of the opposition in two parts. I guess I think everybody recognizes that we do have this issue statewide, and so I'm curious what the opponents propose as a solution if this isn't it. And then second, I don't know if this term got used, but public goods charge has been talked about a lot in California, not just for clean drinking water, but to address some of the environmental issues we have as well. And I wonder if that's feeding into some of the opposition, because this sets a precedent. Does it make sense to try to put them together and just do it all at once? Just if your comments on that.
Well, I appreciate the question, and you hit the nail on the head in terms of certain perceptions. While the opposition is primarily from water districts, it's important to point out we have water districts in support as well. But as you might imagine, those are more likely to be beneficiary water districts as opposed to assessed water districts. With respect to the question of the public goods charge, I think there's fundamental resistance to going to ratepayers to solve any statewide problem, and they see this as the camel's nose under the tent. What we argue is, if you look at SB 623, there's guardrails all around it. The money can't be used for other purposes, and the political threshold, the 2/3 vote, doesn't mean that you're easily going to add on to it or do further ones. Anything else is going to be a de novo effort. In terms of the first part of your question, what would they propose for a solution? So I think it's important to say I don't know that these large water districts are unified in what they think would be a good alternative solution. We have heard from some the idea of taxing plastic water bottle containers. I understand it theoretically, but again, looking at the politics, if you take on that industry, many of those bottles are produced by large beverage organizations. The resistance we would face would probably kill any bill that relied on that as a solution. In some other pathways, I've sought to have the soda industry pay more of its fair share in some of the public health costs of their products, and we've run into very serious, highly funded opposition. So while we understand water districts saying go after them, we're trying to find the solution that we can achieve.
Bryce, and then Ben.
Well, I do too want to thank you for taking on this very needed issue. I'm a rice farmer and a water district board member, and so I get caught on this in two ways. Right over in, I appreciate you're working with Tim Johnson, the California Rice Commission. I appreciate the leadership that they've shown in putting together that partnership. I think what an amazing partnership. Economic justice, social justice, environment, agriculture. I would hope that this would be a model for many things that we can accomplish together. I think the things you've taken on are incredibly important. The liability protection for farmers, and then addressing that through a fertilizer tax. And so the water taxes or the water assessment is the real issue. And I've wondered, and so the fertilizer tax comes from agriculture, and the water tax generally comes from urban. I have heard in many of the water circles I work in that once you start the water assessment for urbans, it's going to come into ag very quickly, and that the agricultural implications to will be significant. And there's been a question: can you keep that separation, that the ag component will be fertilizer and the urban component be water? Do you feel like it's certain that can be maintained?
Well, I think so. I think it's important to qualify. We don't provide an exemption to rural water districts, although many of the users in those rural water districts would be exempt based on the poverty level lines. So there's not a clean break between urban and rural, but it's going to be the urban districts that generate most of the user fee to address the 70% that's non-agricultural. I would offer the same assurance to the prior question. It's not easy to move a 2/3 bill through this legislature, and I don't know that it's going to get any easier after 2018 elections. It may actually become more difficult. So it's logical for people to look at this as potentially a bad precedent, but I think the reassurance that we would offer is there's no way to amend what we do after it becomes law to broaden that tent. There are some provisions that allow a review to adjust downward, but there's nothing that would allow an adjustment upward or more expansive that wouldn't have to go back for a 2/3 vote. And so in that sense, this bill only can do what it says it's going to do, and it can't be later interpreted to impose a broader obligation. But I think the more fundamental issue is people saying that the political leap for us, or the social challenge, is to instill among ratepayers around the state the notion that they can be part of a solution that helps all Californians have access to clean, safe drinking water. And I've talked to people who say, well, I think it's great. I'd pay $10 more a month. I'd pay $20, and for them, that's not an obstacle. We're asking for 95 cents. But it's the districts that represent the interest of the ratepayer, as you do in your service, that your fiduciary duty is really to protect your ratepayer from any unnecessary expense or what they would consider unwarranted. So that's the challenge we face of, is there a way to reconcile a shared commitment to a human right for Californians to safe, clean drinking water, and the notion that all Californians shoulder part of that responsibility. In terms of how people here can help with this effort, through the associations that are already on board, that's been the strongest support. But I realize agriculture is not monolithic. Some of the environmental groups are not monolithic. And even within an association that's crop specific, those members aren't monolithic. There's differences among those members. And so I greatly respect the achievement of the ag associations that have come on board. I think they are the strongest voice right now of agriculture supporting SB 623. But as has been pointed out, our real challenge now is the water districts. And that's where those of you that wear the two hats or have contacts with people that are in water districts can help us make the case. How you're going to protect those least able to pay, and you're going to absolutely cap the contribution. You ask that individual you're talking with, would you be willing to pay $1 more a month? Well, yeah, I would. That's a good starting point. If the person you're talking to is willing to pay 95 cents more a month, take that as a starting point. Let's see if we can find one other person who's willing to do that.
Ben and Martha.
Senator, I appreciate your time coming to the meeting. I happen to wear two hats. I'm on a Southern California water district. I'm also a farmer. And as a board member, we don't have a dot on your map, but we do have arsenic, we have high levels of manganese, we have high levels of boron. Our district is handling those issues amongst ourselves with wellhead treatment. So my question to you is I know the governor has always looked at consolidation as a means of solving the problem. I know Eastern Municipal Water District has maybe talked to somebody up here in Sacramento about moving forward on looking at maybe consolidating a lot of these districts to where there's funding through other ways rather than taxing people that have already paid for that infrastructure and are currently paying for it, rather than having a tax put on it and us being burdened by additional fee where it doesn't benefit us at all.
Well, I think the way you frame the question is exactly the challenge we face, and let me just address it in two methods. First of all, our bill absolutely encourages and supports consolidation where appropriate. So that is one of the remedies that can be supported, but even there's a cost potentially to linking a clean drinking water source to one that's currently contaminated or to a smaller district. So there is a cost associated with that. If it were done absent state involvement, the question becomes what's in it for how does a district that's producing safe, clean drinking water, what's the incentive for them to invest in adding to their service area an area that may have contaminated water? That's going to come out of the district's resources, and you face kind of the same question. Why should we ask our ratepayers to extend a pipe to a neighboring community? So however you do it, if it's done at the local level or or with state support, there's going to be a cost. So that's how I'd partially address that question. I do understand somebody looking at the map and saying, well, I don't have one of those communities in my district. It's kind of the nature of the beast. The larger districts are able to generate enough revenue to provide clean, safe drinking water. And most of these dots are smaller populations. And I gave the example of Watsonville, it's a pretty good sized city. It's 50,000, it's incorporated, but it's poor. And if they had to bill their customers to pay for the Chrome 6 treatment facility, you have people with an income of $18,000 median family income being asked to pay a water bill each month of $500 to $1,000. They wouldn't do it. They can't do it. They don't have the resources. So they're looking to their fellow communities who could maybe afford $1 a month to help them out of that predicament. So it may not be a satisfactory answer, but that's how we're looking at it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult when I have a residence right now that, a normal customer that's paying over $300 a month, and $1 here, $1 there, and track record of government has not been very good on keeping a hat on where the money's going. Here we just had a gas tax and thought we were already collecting monies for highways. So the trust is not there. And so I think your comment is sticking the camel's nose underneath the tent is probably true, and most Californians kind of see that.
I would agree with you that that's how many Californians see it. I would like to believe that the architecture of the legislation would not allow that to happen. I live in Monterey County. We actually live in the Monterey Peninsula. Water's been an ongoing issue for the last 20 years. We have a private purveyor, Cal-Am, that's facing lawsuits. We're under orders from the State Water Board to stop overdrafting the Carmel River. We're one of the best conserving communities in the state. We use less than 60 gallons per person per day, where some Southern California districts are using over 300 gallons per person per day. And as our use has gone down and our conservation has improved, the water rates have gone up. So people say, what's the reward for using less? And we're being asked to pay more for their operations and maintenance. So, I live it. I appreciate the concern. But I also live in a district that has a spectrum of great wealth and great poverty. 26% of my constituents are living below the federal poverty line. Housing costs, transportation costs, et cetera. And most of that's immigrant workforce that's at the low end of the spectrum. Again, I think we have a couple of options right now. We continue to move this forward and be open to suggestions, improvements of the legislation, or we abandon it. To me, abandonment is not an option. We've been grappling with this problem for 20 years, and this agreement brings us closer to a solution than California's ever been. So I'm prepared to work with any constituency, any community to make the case why now is the time to support this solution.
Martha, our last question.
Thank you, Mr. Moning. Know very well your region. A philosophical point, if we could open tomorrow a crowdfunding program, I bet that you could collect the money fast because we will know what's going on in California. But because this has to go through the government and the system, somehow we will donate money, quote unquote, but we will not be able to be taxed 95 cents per month. So we'll put $200, $300, $500 on a GoFund program, but we'll not be able to do a 95 cents, right? Which is a philosophical thing. I say that one of the issues and this is philosophical, and forgive me for that, is when we know where the money is going, and if that title in that little line, which you include in the bill, says some really human element. So when I get the bill, it hits me. I'm helping my brothers and sisters of California. That will be a more touching element than another bill to pay. So somewhere there you can gather us around that, because I see that most of the people who are supporting us are all business owners in the ag industry, but then I look at the California Chambers of Commerce and they're not. And that's, even I see Pepsi's and Coca-Colas of the world helping, saying yes, yet the most of them are in the place that we're not supposed. So there's a complete disconnect. Yet, but I can promise you that if we call on these people for a GoFund, they will step in and fund.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere there is a disconnect in the.
Well, I especially appreciate your comment about the framing. So somebody that's asked to be part of the solution, it's crystal clear. Clean, safe drinking water fund. Human right to water fund. It's explicit what that 95 cents goes to. The GoFundMe solution, while it's been shown to be very useful in some situations, I think raising the $2 billion that this is projected to raise over 15 years, I think GoFunding, we might raise 100,000 overnight, and then it might just kind of.
No, I'm just saying
slow
that
down.
the thinking process that people will
Right.
fund in 2 seconds.
How people are
Right.
attracted.
Like
Right.
where it's going in Puerto Rico. Well, all of a sudden we're funding something
Right.
that should have been funded a long time ago for infrastructure.
That's right. But it is touching the socially responsible gene of Californians to be part of this solution.
So I would propose maybe a promotional campaign, advertising,
Right.
marketing.
And it's interesting you read some of our supporters as Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Based on my earlier comment, it should be clear why they're on board at this point.
Well, thank you so much for representing our state so well for the years that you have. It's a tremendous duty on you and your colleagues' part, and we appreciate it greatly, and we want you to come back and continue to inform us.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. You've been generous with your time this afternoon. We stand ready for follow-up conversations in terms of what can be done. Because Department of Food and Ag is an arm of the state government and the executive branch, I don't know that it weighs in on legislation. The ultimate weigh-in is, does the governor sign the bill if it gets to his desk? And as a result, it's my assumption that you don't, as a board, make formal endorsements one way or the other. But I would hope as individuals in your communities and partners in agriculture, you will help us to elevate this and engage members of both the Assembly and the Senate to help us land this as part of the solution. And again, thank you for your time this afternoon.
You're very welcome. And as a board, we do not lobby. However, we do advise the governor. We're appointed by the governor, and we advise the Secretary of Agriculture. So we can do that. Thank you. Thanks. Josh is going to lead the next.
So we have 2 items before the board as other business. Following last month's meeting, you had directive to staff to prepare 2 letters, one focusing on NAFTA and the Korea Free Trade Agreement, and the other focusing on DACA. And both letters have been provided to you as drafts to review and provide comment. I think maybe DACA up first, given the conversation that we had today. Nancy.
So I think it's certainly timely, and thank you for the letter. And I'm wondering, it's a little light, and I'm wondering if we could include any of the data that we heard today about the contributions that these DACA recipients are providing us.
Especially the data on rural areas and the amount of them on the rural areas.
Yes, that is something we can do.
Can we word it in such a way that I think we need to be looking at a pathway to citizenship for these. I think that that's an important part. I don't know that the current president that we have is going to probably back down on this, but maybe we ought to maybe push him in another direction. And along with that, you know, I would even put something in it on this ag worker program or something in the means of looking at the current immigration issue.
As an overall?
Yeah, as an overall.
While you're pondering that, the other thing is whether to call out the DREAM Act itself, because that's a solution. Instead of just reinstating DACA, that you sort of solve it.
But to my understanding, and I can research this as well, the DREAM Act is not clearly defined. It's several versions, the concept. And there's, I think, competing legislation defining what the DREAM Act is.
That's true, I guess, but maybe we could say something to the point of, you could renew DACA, but what we'd really like is a permanent solution, so it's not subject to being, you know, rescinded again in the future.
Okay. Other comments?
Do we want to also say that not only do we want action, but we want action fast?
Suggested was the discharge, forcing the vote.
Discharge petition?
Maybe use the word disrupting. This is disrupting the economy, the ag industry, the DACA is disrupting.
So you're basically on DACA. You're wanting that to move through. I'd like to see the reform on the immigration to work a little faster than the last time we really looked at this was '86. So, you know, not only students are not comfortable, my employees are not comfortable working.
Okay. So far I have kind of additions of further data, pathway to citizenship, reference to the DREAM Act, a permanent solution, fast action on the discharge petition, and
Comprehensive immigration.
that is, yes. That's
So one suggestion maybe for context of how to set it. So I think comprehensive immigration reform is probably ambitious. But it doesn't mean we could say that is what we want long term, but urgently in the short term, we need a solution to the DACA situation.
Good.
So do we have board action to recommend the president work with staff to finalize the letter?
Any further discussion?
Hendrick and Nancy.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Excellent.
In relationship to DACA, we were asked to take up Senator Feinstein's position. Would you do that after the NAFTA letter, or I don't need to dictate a direction or how you'd like to take. I'm happy to take up NAFTA, but I did like this Senator Feinstein proposal.
Right. I think it'd be appropriate to talk about it now. Are you suggesting, Bryce, that we include our support for Senator Feinstein's blue card in our DACA letter?
Well, I was wondering if that would be appropriate or if you would want to take it up separately.
I'm hearing separate.
Okay.
And that would be also a letter to members of the California delegation? Yeah.
I don't know how we address the Agriculture and Worker Program Act of 2017. The H-2A program really doesn't work for
Well, and
It says in there it needs reform, but it needs more.
I think there's, as our speakers, I think, indicated, I mean, there's several issues swirling around the immigration pathway, as we all know. I mean, the immediate thing is definitely the discharge petition to focus on DACA and then working to enhance agricultural worker pathways. I mean, I think there's multiple bills that are out there that currently in terms of not only Senator Feinstein, but other senator introduced legislation in terms of agricultural workforce. So I think it's more of maybe addressing it in general in terms of agricultural workforce and pushing that, and that we can combine with the DACA letter as one versus direct support for legislation. Does that accomplish what the board was thinking?
Do we have our arms around what the other proposals are?
And no, and that's why, I mean, there's...
That's why you want to give it general.
Yeah, I'd say it's we can arrange a briefing on each of the different things of legislation for the board to consider the diversity of proposals that are out there. I mean...
One that was made was, one of them that's floating around was 500,000, farm workers that be in here. We know there's a whole lot more than that here in California. So why would you limit it to that number? I kind of like what Feinstein's laid out. It's not defined, but if you can say, get some proof on how long you've been here and whatnot so you qualify, I feel a little more comfortable with that approach.
That was introduced already, right? That was introduced already.
The Feinstein bill?
Feinstein one, right? Right? Yes.
I do not know.
Okay. Okay, good.
Do we feel confident that we know enough to know what we want generally?
Absolutely.
That's a good point. Yeah, we want workers.
That's why I think going back to the DACA letter, stressing comprehensive immigration reform, the importance to the agricultural industry is maybe a better recommendation for the board versus two separate letters on the different issues, would be staff's recommendation.
Yeah, because the other ones are complicated. Today there's another one on the floor in DC. Too many people trying to solve, so it needs
So
comprehensive.
your suggestion for us is that we include our support for Senator Feinstein's blue card in our DACA letter.
My recommendation would be to focus on comprehensive immigration reform with an agricultural component, if necessary, and not specifically identifying legislation. Yeah.
What is the board's thought on that?
Exactly. It's all.
Nancy?
Well, I think it is hard to decide that this is the thing we want to support without really being fully informed about the other options. So to me, I think it's better to be more general and maybe use this as an example rather than to specifically endorse.
Bryce, what do you think?
I like that idea. I like this as an example, like this concept.
So do we mention it?
I think Nancy would say use it as an example. I like that idea. I always think it's good to support Senator Feinstein's proposals.
Is the board in favor of including this specifically? I think that's what we're saying. Okay. Is that clear, Josh? Do we need to amend our... Okay, so do I hear a motion and a second to amend our motion to include support for Senator Dianne Feinstein's legislation as a model?
So moved.
By Joy, and seconded by Mike. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So on to our international trade letter. Looks good.
I do have the data that I mentioned. It's 6.3 billion export in 2015 and 17.6 billion import, which makes us, the United States has gone from being a net exporter of fresh and processed fruits and vegetables in the 70s to be now a net importer of fruits and vegetables today.
So this is fresh fruits and vegetables.
And the source is the Congressional Research Service, U.S. Trade Situation for Fruit and Vegetable Products by Renee Johnson,
Okay.
December 2016.
Thank you for finding that, Martha. Any additions, deletions, suggestions, edits, wordsmithing, etc.? Ben?
I really can't support it.
On this letter.
The rest of you can, but my problem is exactly what Martha's talking about, and I grow avocados, and we're out of business because, we have cap and trade, we have minimum wage, we have workers' comp, we have all these other costs that are not in parity with these other countries that are importing here in the United States. And I'm directly competing with packers that I sell to that have operations in Mexico that bring up fruits and vegetables from Mexico. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, that's a very fair and legitimate perspective, and I appreciate you voicing it. Given Ben's thoughts on that, is this something that we want to continue to discuss? Would we? I think you opened your comments, Ben, by saying that if the board feels it's in California's best interest to move forward with it, you would respectfully.
If I was a citrus grower, I'd probably do
Yeah. But so my point is whether within this letter, maybe raise these numbers. Maybe I'm not sure. I mean, I can give Renee Johnson's information to the staff, but get the specific data, like we're saying. The numbers are telling us that we are in balance. We're in balance completely, and this is not helping, and therefore be alert because we're becoming, it's upside down for all of us.
I mean, in terms of like key language, I'd like to point out a couple of elements of the letter. Works to expand free and fair trade for the United States, which is a position of the current federal administration. The expansion of free and fair trade should not limit the United States from renegotiating and modernizing existing trade agreement in close collaboration. Another point in terms of addressing some of the concerns that are out there by the agricultural community.
Josh, I mean, I look at the majority of the crops we grow in California, and I empathize with you, Ben. Our number one crop is almonds. We're the largest exporter. I mean, we supply the world with almonds, citrus, processing tomatoes. We do a third of the world's production. We try to export as much as we can. I just think that if NAFTA gets dismantled, that it's going to be a disaster for California and the exports that we have.
So there's a suggestion on the floor from Martha that we include some of the fresh fruit and veggie data. Okay, thank you.
I agree. Doesn't the data actually argue against the letter?
Yep.
Argue in what sense? I mean, we need more proper immigration reform so we have better working condition, better workers, so we could compete. Because as it is, we're leaving more crops on the ground than we're harvesting. And you can, I mean, anybody can argue me, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I see. While in Mexico, you can pay $3 the whole day and everybody harvests. And nobody's regulating anybody. But they want to come and work here and make dollars, but they can't.
And a larger point, if I may, as well, the board has very rarely not taken unanimous action. So that's something for the board to consider as well, if you want to put this to a vote or not.
Say that again.
It's very rare that this board has not taken unanimous action.
Oh.
And I think that's quite remarkable, and yet I don't think it should detract us or steer us away from taking actions that are believed to be supportive of California agriculture. I mean, I always like to go for it. Yes, Nancy.
Could we look at it maybe as where we disagree and where we agree. I think lines 23 to 27 we all agree on, right? And how about 11 to 15? Do we agree on that?
So where do we disagree?
Right.
Ben, use your microphone, please.
I don't want to expand it the way it's going on right now. I want to renegotiate it.
Is there, without, I really don't want to get into a lot of wordsmithing right now, but is there something, Ben, that would,
Why don't you just go ahead and vote on it? I'll vote opposed to it. I'd move to accept the letter as written.
okay, there's a motion to accept the letter as written. Is there a second? Don? Any further discussion? This is a good time to bring it forward. Hearing none. Yes, Jeff?
All right, well, we'll go to vote then.
Okay. All those in
Well,
favor,
we have to do roll call.
please have a roll call.
Sorry. Ashley Bourne. Aye. Don Cameron. Nancy Cassidy. Helene Dillard. Abstain?
Boy, I really screwed this.
Ben Drake. Mike Gallo.
Yes. Aye.
Bryce Lundberg.
Aye.
Greg McNamara.
Aye.
Martha Montoya. Joy Sterling.
Aye.
This is what democracy is all about.
We have 7 ayes, 2 noes, and 1 abstention. The motion passes.
Thank you for that considered conversation. I think that's important. Okay, our last topic of the day was safe drinking water. Would the board like to take an action on that? Ben would rather not. I knew that from your past thoughts.
Did he ask for an action?
Excuse me?
Did our senator ask for an action per se?
No, I am. I'm thinking that we should discuss it. Ben,
Can I
Bryce?
add one comment first?
Yes.
Senator Monning did say that as an administration or as a department, we don't normally take positions, but we do have from the administration, from the governor's office approval, and we do have a position, the Department of Food and Ag does have a position in support of this.
Which is,
Yeah. Ben.
So I have an idea. Why don't we sit on it a while and
That
see
was
what
exactly my idea.
see what happens? I mean, it's not going to come back until next year.
Yeah.
So let's look at it November, December. I know Eastern, which is one of the larger water districts, has got a couple ideas. So let's see what comes out of it.
Just shows you we think alike. Do other people agree with that?
I do. You know, I think Senator Monning mentioned that the water assessment came in late in the assembly, and I think we all knew it was coming, but the opposition really didn't come in until maybe 2 weeks before the close of session. And I think Aqua does have some ideas on, I don't think Aqua's opposed to they're opposed to the assessment. They're not opposed to concept. I would agree that see if there can be some additional ideas on how to fund this that can come forward.
Thank you.
So,
Yes, Ben.
so our senator down where we are is going to run a bill first thing, and that's that all water agencies and all owners that use water in California have a water meter.
Well, that's a. On that note,
I don't
we do
think
have.
it's certainly not funny.
Nancy, you're raising your hand?
You know, I would just let you know that this morning I turned my water off to my house, and it was because I have a water meter, I can tell I have a leak. Son of a gun. If I didn't Again. So yeah, I've called the American Leak Detection. They'll be out tomorrow. But I believe in water meters. I believe in them because it allows you to make good decisions and know what's going on.
Can I make a comment
Yes.
back to? If you were in our water district, I could tell you what time you get up in the morning, when you brush your teeth, what time you do your laundry, what time you shower, what time your sprinklers come on, and what time they go off.
So
Well, you know a lot more about me than my water district
We have
does.
Nancy and Joy trying to wrap this meeting up. You need to turn on.
I would like to talk about something besides water for a minute. Okay. The elephant in the room for me is that you're going. And I just wanted to publicly say, and starting now and for the next 3 months, how much we have appreciated all of your leadership. It's just been fantastic. And in particular, your exit by inviting Paul Hawken to join us is profound. And I wanted to bring 2 facts to the board's attention, which will make us all feel not too happy. And I'm sorry we have to leave on that note. The first is that for those of you who haven't noticed, the most respected climate authority in California is a man by the name of Dr. Ramanatha, and he works at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. He published a report last week, which is the Institute's latest report, moving the climate crisis from catastrophic to existential threat. He is saying that we have now a 5% chance of extinguishing the human race within the next 13 years. 13 years. And by the time my grandchildren are adults, it goes up to 35%. We are talking about the extinction of the human race, which has been noted by the Pope, the future King of England, and our governor. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure you knew, that the situation is not improving, and it is moving more rapidly than the science first indicated. Secondly, I wanted to let you know that one of the reasons that we as a nation do not perceive this as the crisis that it is, as reported in Harper's Magazine, last year in 2016, the national nightly broadcast news spent 39 minutes on the climate crisis for 1 year. So, thank you, Craig, for your leadership, but in particular, ending your tenure with the most hopeful analysis and contribution that we have, which are this book edited by Paul Hawken that we're going to hear from, called Drawdown. Interestingly, 3 of the top 10 solutions are food related. Number 3 is food waste. And number 4 is, And number 4 is a plant-rich diet. Number 10 is moving to regenerative agriculture. So this is right in our wheelhouse, and I know we've worked on it. We certainly appreciate everything the governor has done to address the issue, but it's getting to the place where we now have to consider our moral responsibility to future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. That was very, very well put. And another person who I would like to consider joining us for that discussion is Jonathan Pershing, who I met at Packard Foundation, I believe it is, and he was one of our climate change negotiators. And could you just repeat the name of the man you quoted, the scientist from Southern California?
Dr. Ramanatha, Ramanatha, I think.
Thank you. Okay, so it's time for public comment. My favorite time. Is there any today? How about our listening audience? Well, thank you, one and all, if there is none. Mary, you don't have any public comment? Okay, great. Once again, thank you to Josh.
Thank you.
Josh, I got to say, every meeting, the people that you bring to have testimony here are so insightful. It's a very diverse group. Your reach and your ability to bring these people to share their lives and thoughts and visions with us is really quite profound. We couldn't do it without you. Well, and thank you to our team behind the black glass back there who've struggled a bit today because of things out of their control. And thank you, board. Great meeting. Josh has something to say.
Just a couple of last-minute announcements. Our next board meeting is November 7th, and unfortunately our board chair will not be there for that meeting. And on November 8th, CDFA and other state agencies are hosting a groundwater recharge forum at the Sacramento Convention Center, and I know that several board members will be participating in that forum. And so I'll send the link out to that and encourage you. But I do not know in terms of a focus for the board for the November meeting. Do we have a preference? Do you want to skip that meeting in favor of the conference?
Very great. Financing system in the ag industry. I hear a lot of pain in the for financing next year because of crops, because of cost, because of this. If you can consider that, I don't know, November, December, January, before you take off, because there are a lot of programs, but nobody knows, or there's not enough being funded and things like that. Today, FarmLink, he mentioned the grower that was him. I'll tell you, I was behind that funding of Rabobank into FarmLink for small growers. And it took me 2.5 years to get that Rabobank to get through CRA to put the first $2 million behind it. But you see there's a success story because of those programs. So it's the blood of our farmers.
So the idea is to, at some point, talk about the financing.
The financing system, the Wells Fargo is the largest ag banking in the world now. And they have a whole crisis with housing. I mean, with the bank, do you see what I mean? And the areas that are most impacted in California with this whole bank accounts open by the Wells Fargo is in the rural areas with our workers and all that. So.
Okay.
I agree with the idea of going to the water forum.
In lieu of? Oh, November.
Do we need a motion, or Josh, or just a decision?
We can just, I think a decision would be the best.
So, gentlemen, ladies, there's an idea that we formally cancel our meeting or reroute it to the water forum. Is that something that everybody would like to do?
Yeah.
Our the 7th.
So come the day before and attend the water?
So there would be no board meeting.
So that would be on a Wednesday? Yes.
And it's not a meeting because you can't.
It's not a meeting. It would be attendance as an own representative. Yeah. So there would be no official board functions.
And no board discussion.
But then, would everybody come? Would we come?
There's been instances where we have not had board meetings. We skipped before. We can. We could talk about water fix. We can get a briefing. It's up to the board. I'm more than happy to facilitate the meeting if the board would like. Will all of the agencies vote by then? I don't know.
Oh, good question.
What was that, Ashton? Can you use your microphone, please?
Well, he was just suggesting we get a briefing on water fix. I was just asking whether all of the water agencies will have voted by then.
One is coming up, October 10th is Metropolitan Water District, and I think that's the big one. And then there's one like a week after that.
And then Kern, and then also Santa Clara.
I think it's all in October.
Water fix meeting would be very important.
Okay. So we're moving forward with the meeting.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that no matter how they vote, there's
Lots
issues either way. So I, for one, would love to have a briefing on water fix.
Thank you.
And you can get him here, right?
And That's a lot of work for John in a month. Yeah. Yes, Bryce.
Well, Josh, I am so thankful for and impressed with the workshops you put together for November 8th. I would encourage as many board members to attend as possible. I kind of was thinking in hindsight it'd be great to have the workshop the day before our meeting, because I think there'll be a lot of action items that can come out of that workshop that the board maybe would take up. But we can do that a month later.
Well, thank you for all of your input today, everybody. It was a great discussion. See you in the future.